Good to have you here. This is Omni View, episode 60, for May 25th, 2026. Balanced news perspectives. New week, fresh perspectives. Let's see what happened over the weekend and what's developing today. Britain faces a potential record bank holiday as forecasters warn temperatures could reach 35°C, testing public health and infrastructure. Forecasters predict temperatures could hit 35°C on the warmest May day in at least 79 years, following unusually high readings across parts of the country on Sunday. The heat has already brought Mediterranean-like conditions to some regions. Outlets such as the Mail Online emphasize the historic nature of the forecast and its rarity for late May. Public health authorities typically stress preparation steps, such as hydration and shade, to protect vulnerable groups. Local governments often focus on managing increased demand for outdoor spaces and emergency services during such events. How do weather records influence public planning for holidays? Shifting now to another domestic story, Special Chief Officer James Deller was suspended following an AI monitoring program that identified what it classified as sexual content on his device. More than 100 officers were flagged after the US-developed software was rolled out. The Mail Online highlights concerns over the software's accuracy and reach within police forces. Civil liberties groups often question the balance between workplace monitoring and individual privacy rights. Law enforcement agencies typically defend such tools as necessary for maintaining professional standards. What safeguards exist when AI tools are used for employee monitoring? Next, the National Health Service has turned to private providers on a large scale. The NHS spent £241 million on private firms to interpret CT and MRI scans last year. Radiologists note that staffing shortages have driven reliance on external providers. The Guardian reports that costs are described as ballooning due to insufficient in-house training capacity. Hospital administrators often cite the need to maintain timely diagnoses despite workforce gaps. Medical professional bodies typically argue for long-term investment in domestic radiologist recruitment. How does outsourcing affect the quality and speed of diagnostic services? Meanwhile, the annual Hajj pilgrimage is underway in Saudi Arabia. More than 1.5 million pilgrims have arrived in Saudi Arabia for the annual Hajj, one of the 5 pillars of Islam. The gathering occurs against a backdrop of a tenuous ceasefire and related regional tensions. NPR frames the event as a demonstration of religious continuity despite geopolitical uncertainty. Saudi authorities typically emphasize logistical preparations and crowd management. Pilgrims and religious scholars often stress the spiritual significance that draws participants regardless of external conditions. How do large religious gatherings adapt to surrounding political developments? In the Caucasus, Armenia is preparing for national elections. Armenia heads into national elections on 7 June, while navigating competing interests from Russia, the US, Turkey, Europe, and Azerbaijan. Officials promote the country as a future link in trade routes connecting Western China and Europe. The Guardian describes Armenia's strategic location as increasingly relevant if regional conflicts ease. Government statements often highlight opportunities to reduce physical isolation through new corridors. Neighboring states typically view any shift in alliances through the lens of their own security and economic priorities. How do small nations leverage geography in great power competition? Turning to the economy, London pubs continue to close at a steady pace. The British Beer and Pub Association reports roughly 2 pubs closing daily in England during the first quarter of 2026. A Bloomberg podcast examined operations at one of the city's popular venues. Bloomberg frames pubs as indicators of wider consumer confidence, commodity costs, and labor trends. Industry groups often call for policy support to sustain community venues. Economists typically analyze how such closures reflect broader spending patterns. How do commodity and labor costs affect small hospitality businesses? Now, to really understand the police suspension story, there is a mechanism most coverage leaves out. Workplace AI monitoring systems involve continuous scanning of devices against evolving classification models that can flag content without human review at the first stage. These systems, often developed by external vendors, Compare files and activity logs against training datasets that label categories such as sexual content. Then generate alerts for administrators who decide next steps, because the models are updated remotely and may reflect the vendor's priorities rather than an organization's specific policies. Flag material can include personal files stored on work devices even when no policy violation occurred. Knowing this, when you hear claims that AI simply found prohibited material, you can evaluate whether the process included human verification, appeal options, or transparency about the model's training data. Next time you see a headline about workplace AI enforcement, ask who trained the model, what counts as a match, and what recourse exists for those flagged before any suspension decision. Tomorrow, watch for further developments in Armenia's positioning ahead of the June 7th elections. That's OmniView. For full source links and more context, check out today's written briefing on the OmniView summaries page. As always, compare outlets, look for primary documents, and separate what's known from what's assumed. If balanced perspectives are valuable to you, share this with a friend and subscribe wherever you listen. See you tomorrow. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.